The alien soldiers stood in a circle, their deep laughter echoing through the dimly lit chamber. It was impossible to tell where their bodies ended and their armor began, sleek and metallic, designed for efficiency rather than beauty. They had heard of humanity what they considered myths, stories made up by lesser species to inflate their own significance. These tales spoke of strength, resilience, and an unwavering will to survive. To the alien soldiers, it was all a joke. How could the fragile humans, with their puny bodies and primitive technology, ever stand up to a race as powerful and advanced as theirs? They scoffed as they gathered around their leader, a high-ranking officer who'd spent decades conquering worlds. He had heard every myth and legend humanity had to offer, and each one was more ridiculous than the last. "They say humans can survive anything," one of the soldiers mocked, mimicking the exaggerated tone of their ancient stories. "They've endured hunger, war, even death itself. What a fantasy!" The laughter continued, but there was one among them who wasn't laughing. Sitting in the corner of the room, an older soldier, his armor battle scarred and dented, watched quietly. He had seen war from a perspective few others could understand. He'd fought alongside humans, faced their unyielding spirit in battles that would have broken other species. He'd witnessed something the others couldn't even begin to grasp. As the mocking grew louder, he finally stood, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years spent in the heat of war. "You think it's a joke," he said, his tone cutting through the laughter like a blade. "But there's a truth you're too blind to see." The room fell silent. The leader, still holding his smug posture, raised an eyebrow. "What truth?" The old soldier's eyes hardened, the memories flooding back as he spoke. "I fought alongside them. I've seen what they're capable of, not just in battle, but in surviving things no one else could. Humans, they aren't like any species we've ever faced." He paused, letting his words settle, before adding in a voice laced with quiet urgency. "You think their myths are just stories? Wait until you see them face real adversity." The silence in the room grew thick, and the alien soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. The old soldier's gaze turned sharp, as if he were preparing to reveal something that would shake them to their core. "You don't know what real war is until you've seen a human in action. I've seen them lose everything, and still, they fight on. They're not the ones who should be underestimated." The leader took a step forward, eyes narrowing. "And what makes you think you know so much about them?" The old soldier's expression darkened as he took a step closer to the leader. "Because I've seen one human take on an entire battalion of your kind. And survive." The room was dead quiet now, the tension palpable. No one moved. No one breathed. But just as the leader opened his mouth to speak, the alarms blared. "Enemy ships incoming," a voice crackled through the comms. And in that moment, the soldiers knew this battle would be unlike any they had faced before. The alarms blared louder, cutting through the tension in the room like a hammer on steel. The alien soldiers snapped to attention, their laughter now replaced by the cold, focused discipline they were known for. But even the most battle-hardened among them couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Something in the old soldier's words lingered, hanging in the air like an unsolved riddle. The myth of humanity had been shattered in that single, quiet moment. "Prepare for impact," the commander barked. His voice was sharp, yet there was a hint of unease in his tone, as though he too was grappling with what the old soldier had hinted at. He had always believed their species was unstoppable. The idea that humans had a secret resilience, something they could tap into in times of crisis, was not just foreign, it was almost laughable. But now, as the ship's hull reverberated with the first impacts, a strange sensation crept into the commander's mind. What if there was more to these humans than they realized? The old soldier stepped forward, his posture stiff, but his eyes were wide with a flicker of something, a long-held fear. "You need to understand," he said, his voice low, "the stories of their will to survive are not exaggerations. They will push through the impossible." The commander, who had been quick to dismiss the human myths, now found himself staring at the old soldier with new respect or perhaps fear. "Then what do you suggest we do?" The old soldier paused, his gaze shifting to the monitors flashing in front of them. "We don't underestimate them," he replied. "And we don't take this battle lightly. If there's one thing I know about humans, it's that when they're cornered, they fight with everything they have." He turned toward the window, his expression hardening. The enemy ships were closing in human ships, small and scattered, but deadly in their unpredictability. No fleet, no matter how advanced, had ever been able to track the movements of the human ships without losing several ships in the process. Their tactics, honed by centuries of survival in hostile environments, were unlike any the alien forces had ever encountered. The tension in the room was thick, every soldier preparing for the coming battle, but the old soldier couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a fight. He had fought beside humans before he knew what they were capable of when pushed to the edge. But this wasn't just about defeating an enemy. This was about facing a truth that had been buried for too long. The commander seemed to read his thoughts. "You still think they have something up their sleeves, don't you?" he asked, his voice full of doubt. The old soldier's eyes remained fixed on the incoming enemy ships. "I know they do," he muttered. "And if we're not careful, it's not just our fleets we'll lose." Suddenly, a loud crash shook the ship, and the lights flickered. The soldiers immediately took their positions, weapons ready. The window on the bridge cracked under the pressure of a nearby explosion, and a fire began to spread across the control room. "Brace for impact," the commander shouted, but the old soldier didn't flinch. He knew that this was only the beginning. The humans had already infiltrated the perimeter, and soon they would be inside the very walls of the ship. In the chaos, the old soldier caught a glimpse of a familiar symbol flashing on one of the consoles, an insignia he recognized from his days fighting alongside the humans. His heart skipped a beat. The humans had already infiltrated their systems, and they were playing a game far beyond what the aliens had anticipated. "Prepare for battle," the commander said, his voice now frantic. "And remember, we don't know what we're up against." The old soldier's eyes narrowed. "Trust me," he whispered. "You'll wish you never found out." The ship rocked violently again, this time with enough force to send a few soldiers sprawling to the ground. Sparks flew from the walls, and the air grew thick with the scent of burning metal. Panic was starting to seep into the ranks, but the old soldier stood firm, his eyes narrowed as he analyzed the chaos around him. "Get the fire suppression systems online." The commander barked, trying to maintain control, but his voice wavered. He knew this was no ordinary assault. The humans weren't just attacking, they were manipulating. Every move they made seemed to throw the alien forces into disarray, as though they had been anticipating this moment for years. The old soldier's gaze drifted across the control room, his mind racing. He had seen this kind of warfare before human warfare. It wasn't about sheer firepower. It wasn't about overwhelming the enemy with numbers. It was about survival, adaptability, and something deeper, a raw, unyielding drive to endure no matter the cost. And that, he feared, was exactly what the aliens had underestimated. "Command, we've got a breach on the lower decks." A voice crackled through the comms, cutting through the tension in the room. "The humans are boarding the ship." A chill ran down the old soldier's spine. It had begun. The humans had infiltrated their defenses, and now they were inside. There was no way to know how many had slipped past their outer perimeter, but he knew one thing for certain: they would fight with everything they had. The commander's face went pale. "Lock down all access points. No one gets through." But even as he gave the order, the sound of boots echoed from the hallway outside the bridge. The old soldier could feel it, he could sense the presence of the humans, drawing closer. They didn't need overwhelming numbers to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. They only needed the right timing, the right strategy. And as the soldiers continued to scramble to secure the ship, it was becoming clear that the humans were always one step ahead. Then, a voice broke through the crackling comms, steady and calm. "This is Commander Rourke. We've secured the main deck. We'll be heading to the control room next." The old soldier's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the name. Commander Rourke had once fought alongside him, back when the humans had shared his ranks. He had seen firsthand the determination in Rourke's eyes, a fire that could not be extinguished. But now, Rourke's voice carried an unmistakable edge, a sharpness that spoke of more than just military precision. "They've already infiltrated the main systems," Rourke continued, her voice now a whisper. "And we're not alone." They've been planting explosives throughout the ship. If we don't move quickly, we'll all go down together." The old soldier's stomach tightened. He could hear it now, the subtle hum of explosives, a sound he'd once feared when fighting alongside humans. The strategy was clear. They weren't just attacking the ship. They were aiming to take it apart from the inside, piece by piece. And in the process, they would reveal something that the alien forces had overlooked for so long: human resilience, resourcefulness, and their unshakable will to survive. Outside, the sounds of combat erupted. The alien soldiers, still reeling from the initial shock, were now engaged in fierce firefights with human infiltrators. The old soldier could feel the weight of every decision he'd ever made, every battle fought alongside the humans, flooding back into his mind. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something deeper, something that the aliens had never truly understood. As the firefights raged on, the old soldier moved swiftly toward the control panel. "We need to take back control of the ship," he said, his voice hard. "If we don't, it won't just be the humans who suffer. It'll be us, too." But before anyone could respond, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of rapid footsteps approaching. The old soldier didn't hesitate. He turned, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. He knew they were coming, and this time they wouldn't be able to stop them. The door to the bridge exploded open, and there, standing in the doorway, was a figure cloaked in the familiar human armor, their face obscured by a helmet. The soldier's stance was calm, confident. This was no ordinary fighter. It was someone who had been trained to fight with precision and purpose, someone who had survived impossible odds. The figure stepped forward, and in the stillness that followed, the old soldier's heart raced. He knew what was coming next, but even he wasn't prepared for what the human would say. "Ready to face the truth?" the voice behind the helmet asked. And then, before the old soldier could respond, the room plunged into darkness. The lights flickered, casting the room in an eerie, stuttering darkness. For a moment, there was only the sound of the hum of the failing systems and the distant echoes of gunfire from the halls. The old soldier's heart pounded in his chest as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. Every muscle in his body tensed, ready for whatever came next. The human in the doorway had vanished, blending into the shadows with unnerving precision. "Where are they?" the commander hissed, his hand gripping the side of the control panel as if it could somehow anchor him to the rapidly unspooling reality. "Get the lights back on. Now." A moment of complete silence stretched out, like the calm before a storm. Then, a sudden hiss of air, a faint whistling sound, and the unmistakable click of a weapon being primed echoed from somewhere deep within the corridor. The soldiers braced themselves, weapons at the ready, but they all knew it was too late. The humans were already inside. The old soldier's mind raced, sifting through every battle he'd fought, every lesson learned in the heat of war. Humans didn't play fair. They didn't rely on the same tactics that other species used. They adapted, survived, and when you least expected it. And now, their plan was unfolding systematically, methodically. They were already inside their walls. They had known all along that the aliens weren't the real threat. They were simply a distraction. The true danger was the one hidden beneath the surface, the human's ability to endure and to fight when everything seemed lost. Suddenly, the silence shattered with a deafening explosion, the force sending the entire room into chaos. The walls buckled, the ceiling cracked, and debris rained down from above. A blinding flash of light filled the room, and when the haze cleared, the old soldier's eyes locked onto the human figure that had stood in the doorway just moments before. It wasn't just one soldier now. Dozens had infiltrated the bridge, flooding the room with their presence. They moved like shadows, swift and silent, striking from unexpected angles. The old soldier knew they weren't here just to destroy. They were here to take control, to expose the very weakness the aliens had ignored for too long. They had been underestimated, laughed at, and dismissed, but now the tables had turned. The commander's voice came out in a strangled shout. "Stop them. Don't let them take the bridge." But even as the order was given, the old soldier could see it, he could feel it in the air. The humans weren't focused on the ship's systems or the technology. They were focused on something else, something far more dangerous. One human soldier, a tall figure with a scar running across his cheek, stepped forward. His movements were measured, deliberate. In his hand, he held an explosive device, one designed to breach the deepest core of the ship's engine room. It was a calculated risk, but the old soldier knew it was part of the human strategy. It wasn't just about taking down the ship. It was about forcing the aliens to confront a truth they could no longer ignore. The figure raised the device high, and in that split second, the old soldier saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. This wasn't just a soldier he was facing, it was someone he had fought alongside, someone who had seen the same horrors. The human's voice, barely a whisper, cut through the tension. "We always win, in the end." The explosion detonated with a force so powerful that the ship seemed to tremble, as though it might tear itself apart. The lights went out completely, and the sound of rushing air filled the room as the blast shockwave reverberated throughout the ship. The old soldier stumbled backward, gripping the edge of a console to steady himself. He could hear the frantic sounds of his comrades trying to regain control, but it was clear whatever had just happened had shifted the balance of power. The commander's frantic orders filled the air, but even he couldn't mask the fear in his voice. And then, everything fell silent again. Through the darkness, the old soldier could just make out the shape of the human soldier standing at the center of the room, the smoke still curling around him. In his hand, he held a small, flashing device, the trigger that would either destroy them all or give the humans everything they had come here for. The old soldier's breath caught in his throat. This was the moment. The one he had feared and expected all along. The moment where everything would change. But just as the soldier stepped forward, a voice crackled through the comms, harsh, broken, and distorted. "We've got incoming. This time, it's not just us. Something bigger is coming." The tension in the room thickened, a new, more terrifying threat now looming in the distance. The voice on the comms was barely audible, distorted and glitching with static. But even through the crackling noise, the words were unmistakable. Something else was coming. And it wasn't just another wave of human soldiers. The old soldier's stomach dropped as the reality of the situation hit him. They had no idea what they were really up against. "What do you mean something bigger?" the commander shouted into the comms, his voice rising in panic. "Explain now." But the response came not from the voice, but from the ominous rumble that shook the ship's foundations. It wasn't the blast of the recent explosion. This was something different, something far heavier, a force that seemed to carry the weight of an entire fleet. The ship groaned in protest, and the lights flickered again, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch further than they should. The human soldier at the center of the room glanced toward the viewport, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he began to speak, his voice calm but filled with a chilling certainty. "They're here." The old soldier's breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. There was no way they were already here. Not yet. The humans had been desperate. And then, the first strike came. A massive shadow passed over the ship's hull, darkening the control room, as if a cloud had blocked out the stars. The commander turned to the viewport, his face drained of color as he saw the enormous warship looming overhead, an alien vessel, but not one like anything they had encountered before. It was massive, almost unrecognizably so, with a design that seemed to defy logic, sharp, angular, and gleaming with an ominous energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. The ship was a living thing, with tendrils of energy running across its surface, shifting and changing as though it was adapting to the environment around it. The old soldier's mind raced. He had seen this before, but never on this scale. This wasn't just a military assault. This was something far more calculated, more strategic. This was an invasion. And it wasn't just humans who were involved. Whoever was behind this, whoever was piloting that monstrous ship, had waited for the perfect moment to strike. And now, they were preparing to finish what the humans had started. "We have to move, now." The old soldier barked, his voice urgent. "Get to the escape pods. Don't waste time." But it was already too late. The ship began to shake once more, this time with a ferocity that sent soldiers crashing to the ground. The view outside the bridge became obscured as massive energy beams from the alien vessel tore into the hull, shaking the very core of the ship. The room itself seemed to be tearing apart, the walls buckling and twisting under the pressure of the incoming fire. The human soldiers, still locked in combat with the remaining alien forces, paused. Their eyes turned toward the viewport as they watched the sky darken with the presence of the enormous warship above. A mixture of fear and anticipation washed over their faces. This wasn't just another battle. This was a fight for survival on an unimaginable scale. And then, without warning, the ship's comms lit up with a new voice, a voice that was alien but unmistakable. "This is command of the Ascendant Fleet," the voice boomed, its tone cold and full of authority. "Your resistance is futile. Surrender now, or face complete annihilation." The old soldier's hands clenched into fists. The Ascendant Fleet, the ones responsible for the destruction of countless civilizations, had arrived. But what they didn't know was that this was exactly what the humans had been preparing for. This was what they had been fighting for all along. "You can't control this," the old soldier muttered under his breath, his gaze hardening as he glanced at the human soldier in front of him. "You can't control them." But even as the words left his mouth, the ground trembled again, and a deafening roar split the air. The Ascendant Fleet's flagship unleashed another wave of fire, and the entire ship lurched, sending everyone scrambling for balance. The lights flickered once more, casting the room into a flickering, disorienting darkness. And then, as the chaos continued to unravel, a single message blared through the comms, cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Initiating countermeasure protocol. Activate the weapon." The words were spoken with finality. A weapon! What weapon? The old soldier's mind spun, realizing that everything had just escalated to a level he couldn't have predicted. The humans had more secrets up their sleeves than anyone had imagined. The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome? It was anyone's guess. With a sudden, sharp crash, the bridge doors were blown open, and standing in the doorway was another human, this one not dressed in standard combat gear, but in something far more menacing. It was a suit, armored, sleek, and covered with the same insignia the old soldier had seen in the files he'd once read. "You're not alone," the figure said quietly, his voice sending a shiver down the old soldier's spine. And then, before anyone could react, the countdown began. The countdown blared through the ship's comms, its mechanical voice echoing in every corner of the control room. 10 seconds. The tension in the air was palpable, thick and heavy. The old soldier's heart hammered in his chest, his every instinct screaming at him to move, to find a way to stop whatever was coming. He glanced around at the human soldiers still locked in combat with the alien forces, their faces grim but resolute. There was no way to escape it now, not without facing what was about to unfold. "Stop it!" The commander screamed, his hands shaking as he scrambled to access the control panel. But the lights flickered and the systems hummed with an eerie, uncooperative silence. They couldn't stop the countdown. They couldn't stop the weapon. The human soldier in the armored suit stepped forward, his eyes locked on the old soldier with a calmness that didn't match the chaos surrounding them. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cutting through the cacophony. "This isn't just a weapon. It's the key to everything." The words sent a shiver down the old soldier's spine. The key to everything. The realization hit him like a freight train. The weapon wasn't designed to destroy it, was meant to unlock something far worse. The Ascendant Fleet had no idea what they were truly dealing with. Before the old soldier could ask another question, the armored figure pressed a button on his suit, and the ship trembled violently as the countdown reached 0. A deafening roar filled the air, followed by a surge of blinding light that enveloped the entire ship. It was as if time itself had been suspended, and for a moment, nothing existed but the overwhelming energy surging through every circuit, every fiber of the ship. And then, just as quickly, everything stopped. The lights flickered back on, the tremors ceased, and a heavy silence descended over the ship. The old soldier blinked, disoriented. The human soldiers, though battered, were still standing. But there was something different now, something had changed. The view outside the viewport revealed a sky that had been altered. The Ascendant Fleet's massive warship had been frozen in space, its systems incapacitated, unable to move. The invasion force was stalled, caught in a strange, inexplicable hold. "What just happened?" the commander asked, his voice shaky as he peered through the viewport. The human soldier, still standing at the center of the room, lowered his gaze and spoke softly. "The weapon didn't just stop them. It rewired the space around us. It's like a net that traps everything in its vicinity." A cold realization crept up the old soldier's spine. The humans hadn't just prepared for an invasion. They had prepared for something bigger, something far more dangerous. The weapon wasn't just a last-ditch effort to save their world. It was a defense mechanism that could alter the very fabric of space itself, controlling and trapping entire fleets. But the horror of it was still dawning. The human soldier's voice dropped, quieter now. "There's one more thing. The weapon. It doesn't just lock things in place. It's connected to something else. Something we've been hiding." Before anyone could ask, the armored figure turned and activated another device. This one more intricate, more dangerous. The floor beneath them hummed with energy as a new, more terrifying force began to pulse in the heart of the ship. The old soldier felt it before he could see it, a shift in the very air, a pressure building that was unlike anything he had ever experienced. And then, with a flash, the ship's internal systems flickered once more, this time violently, as a new figure appeared in the center of the room. It was unlike any of the human soldiers the old soldier had faced. This new being was tall, ethereal, its presence both familiar and alien. The figure looked at the group with piercing eyes, the same insignia the old soldier had seen before glimmering faintly on its armor. "We weren't the first ones to awaken it," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant. "The weapon wasn't just designed to fight. It was meant to call." The old soldier's mind raced. Call? Call what? The air grew colder, the walls of the ship seeming to pulse with a dark energy, as if the ship itself were alive. The armored human soldier turned to face the new arrival. "They're here," he said grimly, his words filled with a quiet dread. The old soldier's stomach dropped as the full weight of the moment hit him. The weapon had not only stopped the ascendant fleet, it had awakened something else, something far worse. They had unlocked a force that was never meant to be disturbed, and now it was coming. The final twist had arrived. The ascendant fleet was no longer the greatest threat. Something far darker was emerging, something the humans had feared, something ancient, something powerful. The fate of the universe now hung in the balance. And just as the door to the bridge slammed open and the sound of distant, eerie whispers filled the air, the figure's eyes glowed bright red. "Get ready," it said. "It's time." Then, with a sudden and deafening roar, the ship lurched violently again, and the entire vessel began to shudder, as if caught in a storm far worse than any they had faced before. The old soldier had no idea what was coming, but one thing was certain: they were no longer in control. The ship's interior shook violently once more, the sound of metal groaning under pressure echoing through the walls. The armored human soldier stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he locked onto the glowing figure standing at the center of the room. The whispers had grown louder, an unsettling hum that seemed to be coming from the very core of the ship itself. The air had thickened, almost alive. "Hold your ground," the soldier said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. He turned to the old soldier, who was still struggling to comprehend what was happening. "This isn't what we planned, but it's the only way now." The old soldier's mind raced. The weapon they had used to trap the ascendant fleet wasn't just a defensive measure, it was a beacon, and now something was answering that call. Whatever it was coming for them. "We've got to act fast," the old soldier muttered, his eyes scanning the room. The whispers were growing more intense, the very air vibrating with the unknown presence. The human soldier raised his hand, signaling for everyone to get ready. Suddenly, the lights flickered once again, and the figure in the center of the room stepped forward. It was clear now that this wasn't just any human, but someone or something who had been hiding in plain sight. The suit it wore seemed to shimmer and warp, as though it was more than technology. It was a part of the being itself, a living entity intertwined with the ship. "They've awakened," the figure said, its voice now a low rumble, full of ancient power. "But we're not ready. None of us are." The words sent a shiver down the old soldier's spine. This wasn't a threat they could face with brute force. The Ascendant fleet had been a challenge, but this was something far older, far more dangerous. "We can't stop it," the armored human soldier said, stepping toward the figure, his face grim. "But we can slow it down. Long enough to make sure the others can escape." The old soldier's heart sank. Escape? Where? There's nowhere left. The armored soldier's eyes met his, a flicker of determination in them. "There's always somewhere. But first, we need to make sure the weapon doesn't fall into their hands." Without another word, the human soldiers moved into action, their coordinated efforts a testament to their resolve. The figure in the center of the room seemed to dissolve into the shadows, its form no longer solid, but shifting with the flickering lights. The whispers grew louder, the ship's walls beginning to pulse with an unnatural energy. The battle raged on, both physical and mental. The old soldier felt the pressure mounting, the weight of every decision pressing down on him. He had seen battles before, fought wars that had torn nations apart. But this was different. The stakes were no longer just about victory or survival. They were about understanding something far more profound. As the human soldiers worked quickly to disable the control systems, the old soldier watched as the Ascendant fleet's warship began to tremble once more. The strange, ancient force they'd awakened was now pushing back, its tendrils of power stretching further, attempting to regain control. The hum of energy grew louder, reverberating through the very bones of the ship. Time was running out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the figure reappeared in front of the control panel, its eyes glowing with a strange light. "It's done," it said simply, its voice full of finality. The ship groaned once again, but this time, the energy in the air began to dissipate. The Ascendant fleet's vessel faltered, its systems deactivating one by one, the threat slowly but surely neutralized. The hum of the ship quieted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the silence was deafening. The old soldier exhaled, his body trembling from the adrenaline that had kept him alive for so long. They had done it. They had stopped the invasion, but not without consequences. The weapon had been disabled, but the ancient power they had unleashed was not something easily contained. The humans had saved them, but they had also awakened something they couldn't fully understand. As the dust settled and the last of the alien forces were driven off, the human soldier turned to the old soldier. "You've seen what we can do, but we're not done yet. There's still more to uncover, more to fight for. And now you're part of it." The old soldier nodded slowly, his thoughts heavy with the weight of what they had just survived. The battle was over for now, but the war, the true war, was just beginning. The doors to the bridge slid open, and the group slowly filed out. The universe was vast, and there was much more to learn, to uncover, and to fight for. But one thing was certain: humanity had proven its place in this universe, not just as survivors, but as a force to be reckoned with. And as the stars stretched out before them, the old soldier couldn't help but wonder what other secrets did the universe hold, and who, or what, would be waiting for them next.